Hi everyone, Darren here, and today I'm taking a look at Ultimate Admiral Age of Sail, a game that recently just had its 1.0 launch out of early access on Steam. Now this game is by the developers behind Ultimate General series, and despite the name, Age of Sail actually features both land and sea battles, and sometimes they're even combined, where you'll have these ground forces moving up to a village while simultaneously maneuvering your fleet alongside the coast, disembarking your units with rowboats, and invading behind enemy lines. It's really quite good, and as someone who actually isn't really that big of a fan of the era, sorry to say, I kept coming back for more, which is a very good sign. But before we take a deeper look at the game, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Skillshare offers classes ranging from creative writing, graphic design, video editing, and even game development. Now, I've used it personally when I wanted to learn more advanced video techniques for editing. I took the class Animating with Ease in After Effects by Jake Bartlett, which was excellent because the class also provided the art assets and project files needed, which were huge time savers. Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning that there's no ads and they're always launching new premium classes, workshops, as well as their new live classes. Skillshare Premium is less than $10 a month with an annual subscription, and the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. Thank you to Skillshare. So, Age of Sail has 2 different campaigns and 1 DLC campaign, so bad news out of the way first, there's no sandbox campaign or Total War style of building. Instead, you get offered a series of missions each turn, and completing them earns you money that you're going to use to then build and manage your fleet to quite a large degree of flexibility. Now, you can hire different units once you've researched the right technologies, outfit them with the guns of your choice, and even adjust their size, which adds more weight to your ships, slowing them down. Ships themselves are no different. You decide the cannons, the officers, the types of ammunition, and even the amount of crew. Now you might wonder, why would I want more or less crew? Well, there's an optimal amount you should aim for so that the ship is fully manned and able to maneuver as fast as possible, but often you're going to want to place a little bit more than you actually need on a ship, because inevitably you're going to lose some. When the first volley of cannons blast you, you're going to want to have enough hands on deck to still be able to man your guns, put out the fires, activate the pump, and move the ship, after all. The campaign also has permadeath. All your decisions are final and have some consequence to them, whether in battle or not. For instance, if you lose a ship during a battle, it's gone for good. But on the flip side, if you capture a ship, you get to keep it or sell it. Failing a mission is also possible, and the game will just keep continuing. But the more mistakes you make, the weaker you're going to become overall, and the campaign's going to get really hard, really fast. For people who might struggle with that kind of difficulty, you can play with a dynamic difficulty that will reward you more or less based on your current situation in the game. I actually really recommend this if it's your first time playing, because the biggest issue that I have with the game is just a sudden brick wall of difficulty that you kind of come up against in some missions and then just have a relative ease of others. So, let's talk about the battles. Age of Sail aims to be fairly realistic and historical, so ships are fairly slow, as is the pacing overall. Early on in the campaign, when you've only got 3 or 4 ships, there's a lot of waiting around, but after about 5 or 6 missions, the amount of things you have to do and manage increases exponentially as you get more ships, more ammo types, and need to pull off more complex tasks. So let's have a look at a ship and see everything that you have at your disposal to consider. First is wind. It obviously plays a huge factor here. The colored circle around your ship shows the degrees of speed that you're going to get from the wind based on its direction, and this is actually different depending on the kind of weight of the ship. So big ships have a lot less freedom when going against the wind than a small ship would. You can then raise your sails to 5 different levels, from no sails at all to full sail, fully catching the wind. Where this gets really interesting is if the wind is at an angle. If your sails are fully up and the wind is hitting you from the side, your ship is going to tilt slightly. Now, tilting means that your cannons are aiming down into the water rather than just straight across it, and that severely reduces your range. However, on the other side of that tilt, your cannons are now aiming up into the air, and adversely getting a lot more range. This adds a massive dynamic to the game, where you can position yourself with greater range than your enemy while traveling perpendicular to the wind. However, if you find yourself caught without range, you can just put down your sails, and that tilt will be reduced, leveling out your range on both sides. It's really interesting, because the other well-known game for this type of era is probably, or at least for me, is Empire Total War, and tilt just isn't a factor in that game. So coming from that, I still have to learn quite a lot about how to gauge the wind and work with it effectively. The next thing to consider is armor, represented by the 4 semicircles within the larger circle on the UI. Port, starboard, bow, and stern are tracked separately, and then there's hull integrity for both the left and then right side, which you can see that on the red bar on the UI on top of your ship. Now, your masts can be individually damaged and broken, impeding your sailing capability, and your guns can also be damaged or destroyed when under fire. You can actually see your guns in the circle UI as well, those little dots on the very inner part of it. Depending on what you've outfitted, you can actually check the penetration over distance, as well as reload rates, range, and other metrics. Now, unfortunately, there's no range tool in the game, so I struggled a little bit just to reliably gauge exactly what several hundred yards was, which is only really important if you want to be kind of optimal for the, type of cannon that you're rocking. If you want to hit them mid-range halfway through, it's just a little bit tricky to gauge, especially if you're tilted and you get that extra range throwing off the regular limits. There's also the ship rudder for turning speed, pump for pumping out water, and powder magazine, which can obviously explode. As mentioned, ships also have a crew, and that's the number seen on the UI above the ship, but they also have officers, sometimes multiple, responsible for different things, and you can hire these officers based on their skills and benefits that they'll bring to the ship. They're kind of like modifiers, I guess. Of course, though, they can also die and even be captured. The cool thing is that if a ship is going down, you can load the men onto like rowboats and sail over to another ship and board back onto a friendly vessel to prevent losses and also increase the crew strength of the one you've just joined. And you can actually do this whenever you want. You don't have to have taken damage. So that's basically everything you kind of need to factor in when it comes to naval combat. There's quite a lot going on, but generally the controls are quite user-friendly. Ships will just maintain their direction unless given a command to anchor at a location, or you can set them to follow each other, or draw a line of more complex routes that you want them to follow. When it comes to actual ship-to-ship engagements, you've got unlimited ammo for the base 3 types: round shot, grape shot, and chain shot, damaging your hull, infantry, and sails respectively. But you can also add various other types of ammunition to your ship that will be limited in numbers, such as double charge and double round loading. After that, it's basically just up to you to get the ships into the right position, choose your ammo type, and let the crew do the work. You never actually control the guns or the volleys directly, although you can set an aim direction if you want. And it's just something I'm a little bit torn about, because on one hand, it would be cool to kind of choose when to fire off a more optimal volley all at once. But on the other, it's really micro-intensive to do that, so don't really miss the feature too much. Except for the times where you are lined up perfectly, you're watching your crew and you're just begging them to shoot, and they're maybe between rounds for some reason. It can be a little frustrating. So, how does it actually play? Is it fun? Is it challenging? What's the AI like? Well, as I said before, the pacing is really slow, and ships, at least in the first part of the game, seem to do very, very small amounts of damage. I mean, you could fire about 10 full volleys of chain shot right into the sails of another ship and maybe only do about 10% damage to them if you're lucky. Accuracy just seems to be really low, even up close. So this just adds to, really prolonged engagements. Most battles I fought took around 30 to 40 minutes, which in a typical RTS I'm actually totally fine with. But here, it's just a lot of repetition, and then to lose and have to reload and do all that again, it's kind of rough going. So I think there are some pacing issues, and I know a few people that have had similar experiences with that. Now, aside from that, it is quite fun. The AI, I have to say, is really quite good. They've outmaneuvered me many times, surrounded and boarded my slower ships, and they're fairly good at ditching their own ships when things get dicey, getting on rowboats and loading up onto a nearby ally. They will try to save themselves. Now, it's not perfect by any stretch. There's often some weird situations it gets into, but it does put up a really good fight, and honestly, it's better than most other games' AI I've seen. One interesting behavior I've noticed multiple times is they raise their sails against the wind, and they can actually reverse out of a tricky situation when they do that. Now, it's happened a few times. I don't know if it was coincidence or not, but it's quite interesting to see them do something like that. One aspect that has confused me endlessly is morale. Ships have morale, and if it drops to 0%, the ship will surrender. Now, in order to capture a surrendered ship, you have to send over a crew on a rowboat and then occupy it. If you leave them for too long, they'll regain their morale and come into play yet again, even after surrendering. The confusing part is that there's just very little info about what actually dictates morale, and the tutorial never touches on it, or at least not that I saw. I've seen ships that only lose 1-2 men maybe, and you know, just take one volley and their hull armor and all the sails are pretty much fine, you know, 95%, and they start tanking morale for some reason. So it just feels a little bit unpredictable in that regard, but it hasn't been too disruptive overall. The reason I bring that up is just, you know, there's a few things like that kind of just erode away your enjoyment of the game when you can't find out why exactly something's happening. Seeing icons above your ship with no explanation as to what they mean, you're going to have to look through the UI, find a similar icon to try and identify, what is that? Is that a pump symbol? Are we flooding? Like, what's really happening? But once you get over that initial learning curve, the game flows much better. I forgot to mention, you can also board enemy ships. You need to be pretty close, traveling at the same speed, and then be angled parallel to the other ship. Then you'll see the ropes fly over and see sort of numbers ticking down as the two sides fight each other. What's pretty funny about this is that aspect of the game goes by super fast compared to the rest. Like, ships are captured almost within 10 seconds of each other boarding, even if there's like 300 on each side. Now, when deciding to board, it's really all about how much crew you can afford to leave your ship and how good are your officers leading them. If you successfully board, then you capture the enemy ship, but if it's unsuccessful, you lose your own ship. So it's a dangerous thing to pull off unless you're really outnumbering the enemy. The next aspect of the game is the land combat. Now, the majority of the game does take place at sea, but every few missions you'll have opportunities to fight on land, typically to like capture a port or a gun battery or something that's, you know, in the story impeding your ship's progress. Now again, much like the naval aspect of the game, the pacing is really slow, and here infantry units actually do have ammo, unlike the ships that have like a base amount of normal ammo that they never run out of. Your infantry don't have that. They do run out of ammo, and they run out pretty fast. Depending on the mission, you might start at sea and have to unload the troops near the coastline, then form up the lines and start pushing inland. Sometimes though, you'll just start on land ready to go. Now generally speaking, I'd say the land combat is, you know, pretty straightforward. There's not that many units to choose from, and they basically operate the same, except for maybe the artillery and cavalry, of course. Because the missions are scenario-based and semi-scripted, you'll typically be given some interesting objectives to make the gameplay a lot more fun. For instance, when searching for a missing task force, we were led deep along a path towards an enemy camp, and once we took the camp, we then had to hold out and defend against waves of enemies. It's obviously all scripted, but the missions are pretty varied nonetheless. The other land battle that kind of stands out to me was starting out on land, pushing towards an enemy village, and then later receiving reinforcements that could sail up behind enemy lines and encircle the defensive positions. Now, even though things are scripted, it is still all my units, even the reinforcements, and every loss counts, as you need to pay to replenish them manually between battles, and they'll gain veterancy over time, and anything you kind of like secure in the battle or capture, be it artillery or guns or even prisoners when units surrender, they can be sold or used in your future missions. So there is a fairly large degree of flexibility in terms of what you can take into a mission, what you can take out, and how that's going to impact your overall campaign. You could of course just ignore some missions altogether if you think the losses are going to be too severe and you just want to store up some money for later. Now my only gripe with the land battles is that controls can at times be finicky to kind of line people up properly, and the range of your units just feels really, really low. Troops get tired very quickly, and they sort of seem to fire through buildings, or they at least visually look like they are. I can't tell if the bullets are going through, it doesn't seem like it. But they're still wasting their ammo, instead of just waiting until they can get a clear shot. Pathfinding overall is pretty good, as is the AI, but you can't adjust the rank and file of soldiers, and you can't really tell them to take cover against low walls and things. I mean, it kind of tells you that in the tutorial, and the AI often does sit behind barricades and walls, but there is a cover metric on the bottom left of your unit, and it tells you how much in cover they are. And unless you're in trees, it's always at 0%, whether you're behind a wall or not. So I don't know if that's just a visual thing, or if they actually are in cover behind the wall, or what's going on there, but it doesn't seem like it. You know, referring to Total War again, it'd just be nice if I knew, and I could just latch on to the kind of walls or the geometry of the buildings and things like that. That'd be nice if you could do that. The land portion of the game does feel, you know, slightly less developed because of that than the naval portion, but I am glad it's still there. It shakes up the gameplay. It's cool to have, you know, combined land and sea battles. Not many games are doing that, so it's at least a bit of a unique selling point. So that's basically everything for Ultimate Admiral Age of Sail. I think it's a good game, but the biggest issues would be pacing, difficulty spikes, and just the general atmosphere is certainly lacking in some regards. It's something I didn't want to spend too long on during the video, but from a distance, things can look quite nice. But when you get up close, the game is lacking not just visuals, but a variety of sounds, ambient audio, and the music can get quite stale very quickly. Now, in case it wasn't blindingly obvious, this is an indie game. It's much cheaper than a Paradox or a Total War game, and frankly, it's much cheaper than a lot of other indie games in the strategy genre. So I do give it a little bit of a pass aesthetically, but I think just, being realistic, putting on my gamer hat, I think it's fair to say that, Empire Total War, a game from 2007, still visually looks better than this game. And it's not that looks determine everything. They don't, I tell myself that every day, trying to still convince my girlfriend. But this game also has a linear campaign, so it's even on the gameplay department just a little bit more lacking in some regards. And it's got near identical gameplay overall for the moment-to-moment ship battles and the units. Admittedly, though, it has slightly a little bit more depth when it comes to the wind, I guess, and carrying ammo and things like that. It's got to be mentioned, though, this game doesn't feature any multiplayer, which is very odd, considering the studio also makes a game called Naval Action, which from what I can tell is just like an online version of this game. So I'd recommend this game if you're a fan of the era, but if you're not, then my guess is that some of the things I've mentioned and complained about maybe, the pacing, finicky controls, those sort of things, might just frustrate you. On a bit of a side note, the next Ultimate General game coming from the studio sounds really, really good. It's got a real-time campaign with delayed orders and reconnaissance and stuff, so hopefully, if people are interested, I can get around to covering that game as well. That's it for my review. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to leave a like or share the video with anyone you think may be interested, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, thank you very much for watching, and remember, if you want to support this series directly, you can click the join button to become a channel member. Doing so will get your name in the credits, as well as loyalty badges and emotes to use in the comments. If you don't see the join button, it means the video has been copyright claimed, but you can still join from the channel page on desktop. You can also link your account to our Discord to get a special role on there that will give you access to the Senate House and a few other perks.